This is the Luxe F6 on the right hand side of the picture and the Luxe F6E, the winter version, on the left hand side of the picture. There's been a lot of questions about the differences between the two products, so I thought probably the easiest thing would be to go through them both side by side and then see the differences firsthand. As you can see, they are both the same height, they both have the same footprint, and they are both made from the same materials, so there's no different on that score. So let's start by looking at the F6 shelter. Now this comes with a double inner, suitable probably for 2.5 people. If you've got a pet or children you want to take backpacking and keep things fairly light. It is erected at the moment, it doesn't come with a pole, so it's erected at the moment with a pair of Lecky walking poles and the backpacking light missing link section, which links the flick-lock poles together. So let's take a tour around the exterior of the shelter. As you can see there's a reasonable vestibule. That's certainly suitable for a pet or some cooking or some equipment and wet boots and things that one would collect as they go along. The door is a J-zip door, so it's a double-ended zip which takes allows the door to be opened from the top or the bottom, which of course then gives you ventilation during the night should you wish to open the top section and let a bit more air flow through. At the top of the zip there's a fine mesh ventilation panel there and a stiffer rod that will keep the curve of the shelter open above the zip to obviously prevent any water ingress. But that provides ventilation even if you've got the door closed, which is excellent. At the top of the shelter you have a nice tab which, should you wish to, you can erect the shelter externally, thus missing out the pole completely, and just by attaching a cord to that and a suitable structure above it. But certainly something that the bushcrafters are definitely interested in. Now both shelters come with 6 pegs, and I've attached the inners to the pegs which are provided. These pegs are the longer variety, not the short ones that Luxe used to supply years ago, and so that makes for a much more stable shelter. And the idea is that once you've erected the inner, of course the F6 will be inner first because the pole has to suspend the inner tent upwards. You place the pegs, and then the idea is that when you throw the outer skin over the top you would then link the outer guys to the same peg. But in practice that seems a little bit awkward. You want obviously the ventilation, you can see there the gap between the inner and the outer, you want that to be as comfortable as possible. And I found just doing this now as an exercise that those pegs attached to the outer, I had to put in an extra 5 pegs to spread the outer a bit more. So that's something worth taking into consideration. Although the idea is good, in practice it wouldn't give you the ventilation or a nice taut pitch. Around the outside here you'll see that you have the guy point at the bottom of each corner, and then halfway up the sides you have an additional attachment point for a second guy. Now in practice this makes it an extremely stable shelter, but that guy doesn't come with the shelter, so you'll have to consider the extra pegs I suggest for the pulling the fly taut, and then obviously a guy and the pegs for that as well. But this shaped shelter does shed the wind exceedingly well, and so consequently it is worth having the confidence when it's nailed to the ground, as it were. Now in the centre of each panel, just go forward here, there is an additional guy point, there we go, already sewn into the shelter, and it is sewn in, as you can see, with a reinforced patch, and that'll take a 3mm cord and that again gives you the option of a few more pegs, but once again that will really make the shelter very, very taut. And so we're so far up to the 6 pegs that came with it, another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pegs for the outer, and then another 5 pegs for the panels. But once again, it does make it very, very taut. And what I would suggest, to be honest, is rather than guide points through that section, I might put shock cord through there just to allow for a little bit of movement with the weather. So moving inside the shelter, let's see how much space we've got. I have to say, this is vast. Now, we get a lot of questions from people who are taller than I am. I'm 6'2", who are about 6'4", 6'6", asking if this shelter would be suitable for them. I can assure you it would be. When I'm inside this tent, I can stretch out quite happily, and I've got a good 1.5 feet, 18 inches further than my length of torso, and there's plenty of space. So you can easily get 2 adults in here very, very comfortably with all their kit, and as I say, probably 2 adults and a child, or a pet or something, again with the kit quite comfortably. The centre of the ground sheet, as you can see, has got a collar, so the pole can go through the ground sheet there, and then you can pull that taut around the actual pole itself to prevent any leakage, and it also allows you, if you want to obviously put some sort of support underneath the pole. And these lecky poles, as I say, have got the backpacking light missing link there, the orange section, which is solid aluminium, which is tapered, and that will support the pole very rigidly and support this shelter with maximum amount of safety. You haven't got much in the way of storage pockets in here. I personally don't think they're much use to anybody anyway, but some people like them. There's a small one there in the corner, and there's a small one there at the top of the apex. I'm not too sure what you'd use it for, but there you've got it if you want it. So that's the F6. Now the F6, just to remind you, comes with that double inner. You have the option to purchase the V4 single inner, which will take up half the shelter, half the footprint, and that would of course leave you copious amounts of space for your gear and so on, should you just want inner for one person. Now the floor of the inner on the V4 will probably cope with somebody up to about 6'2". I'm 6'2", and I'm just on the edge of its, from a comfort point of view, if you're lying on a 2-inch mat. But I would put up with it if I needed the inner. Of course, if you didn't need the inner and you just wanted a massive tarp shelter, then you've got an excellent shelter there. So just to remember the key points then, basically you've got the J-zip, you've got a single attachment point on the sides for additional guy lines, and you've got the sliders already sewn in around the edges and each panel for additional stability. So now let's look at the F6E. So this is called the winter version, and instantly you can see there are a few things slightly different. Just from this shot alone, you can see there is a snow skirt that runs around the outside on the bottom of the shelter, and there is what appears to be a chimney or ventilation hole to the right hand side of the picture there. Also, you'll notice the door is a different shape. It isn't a J-zip on the door, it's a standard straight zip. So that's something worth considering. So we'll have a bit of a wander around the outside of it and look at some of the key points, and then hopefully the differences will be clear. With each shelter comes a pair of webbing. In the case of the F6E, it's a purple reflective webbing you can see on the floor there, and the F6, it is a thinner black webbing. The idea is these attach to 4 plastic loops in the corners where you can see it laid out at the moment, and allows you to peg out the rectangle before erecting the pole, should you be erecting the skin first rather than the inner. Now, going back to the F6, that was a double, so the pole had to go in first, so the inner was erected first before the outer. But obviously if you were to purchase the solo inner, you would pitch the outer first and then the inner afterwards, and hook that into place with a ring that just hangs from the centre. The F6E, coming with a single inner, allows you to pitch outer first and then followed by the inner hooked into place. So that's the reason for that purple webbing, and I've just left it there as an indication of where it would go. There's one there and one on the other side there that would go under the inner as you see it at the moment. Okay, the inner that you see, if you've seen one of the V4 inners, you'll instantly notice that there is a lot of nylon on there and not much mesh. We'll get inside shortly and you'll see what mesh there is. However, the first thing I must stress is the footprint of this winter F6 inner, E inner, is the same, exactly the same as the V4. So if you were expecting a larger single inner, you're going to be disappointed. The F6 that comes with the double inner will easily take people who are 6'4", 6'6". This one is for people up to 6'2". So everything basically on the F6E, the winter version, is a bit more heavy duty. It comes with the same 6 pegs as the F6, so the longer pegs, but as you can see, the webbing points, the attachment points at the base of the shelter are much juicier than the F6 standard cord. Going up each side, you'll notice we have one guy attachment point and then another guy attachment point. So you're allowed 2 guys, or one cleverly forming a triangle between the two to give you much more stability. These attachment points are more juicy than the ones on the standard F6. Now you may be wondering why there is an elasticated shock cord on the lower tab or all the way around the shelter. On the snow skirt that runs around the outside here, you'll see there is some loops stitched in, part of the way in and on the corner as well. And these loops allow the skirt to be pulled up and clipped into place using those hooks for ventilation purposes, should you be using it not in winter. And there you have it, just tucked up there using the corner tab at the bottom of the snow skirt, just to give you an idea of one of the options that you can do with it to increase the ventilation underneath the skirt should you need it. You may remember I said around the base of each panel on the F6 there was a slider in place and all you had to do was put your cord through it. On the F6E, because of the snow skirt, there is a tab sewn in and you can obviously put a more juicy guy cord through there along with your line lock to pull that taut. So this is the amount of vestibule you would have in the F6E. Or in the F6 with a V4 inner. As you can see, it's a huge amount of space. So whatever activity you've got, perhaps if you've got one of these small A-light seats and you just want to sit back in a bit of shelter and watch the world go by, or do a bit of spoon carving, it's a lovely amount of space. Now whereas the F6, the inner was obviously pegged out first, the pole put inside, and then the outer thrown over the top. With the F6E, because the outer goes up first, the inner is attached by these hooks, which hook into the same O-rings that the purple tab hooks into when you're initially laying the shelter out. So that saves for extra pegs, and that actually works quite well. And that's like an elasticated cord as well, so it will obviously adapt to your needs depending on how you've laid the shelter out. Of course, you're going to be interested in the ventilation hole, which you would need for winter to let some air flow through, and naturally it has a closing tab on it to allow more air through to keep all the bugs out. Now I'm sure people are going to ask about putting a stove in here and using it for a stove. There is no way that that would be suitable for the temperature of a stove. A, it is far too close to the ground, and B, the sill nylon would just melt with the intensity of the heat. So I wouldn't suggest using it with a stove of any kind whatsoever. Now, looking directly to the apex of the tent, you can see that the pole, this is the 163 pole by the way, the pole is sitting inside what looks like to be a half a tennis ball. And you would be right, it is in fact half a tennis ball. This is a common way that people use to take a little bit of the tension out of the actual apex stitching and also protect the pole from moving around, because obviously the rubber of the ball stops the pole sliding around as it would do if it was against the nylon fabric. The other half of the tennis ball is actually in the ground. So down here you have the tennis ball with the pole sitting in it, and that helps the pole prevent from sliding and sinking too much. Although it's a nice day today, it has been raining and this ground is quite sodden, so the pole has naturally sunk, but it hasn't sunk very far. It's literally sunk half a tennis ball. So it's a useful tip to actually, if you've got an old tennis ball, carve it in half and use it to protect the pole from sinking too much. The other thing I would suggest today, that from pitching it, the 163X pole is at its maximum extension. The ideal height for this shelter is 160, obviously allowing for a little bit of sinkage of the pole into the ground. The 163 pole is as far as it will go, so I'd certainly suggest you look at the 197 pole as an alternative. Now, looking also at the top here, that's the vent, top vent above the door's just there, and as you can see there is a flap hanging down. Again, to maximise the heat during winter, that flap can fold up and hook into the same ring which is hanging down from the centre, which you can't quite see from here, which is where the cord on the right hand side, the top of the inner, is hooked into, and that is holding everything taut. So that would again save the heat escaping. At the top of the inner door is the only place you'll find any ventilation mesh on the inner. And once again, to prevent heat loss, behind that there is another flap which hooks up and prevents airflow and the heat escaping. So this is advertised as a winter tent, perhaps a winter solo tent, the F6E. The big question on anybody's lips is it worth it, or is it ideal for UK European 3-season use? I would say you would be better off buying a standard F6 and then a V4 inner to suit your needs. This tent certainly doesn't allow enough airflow for warmer temperatures, and putting it up today, I can assure you it really does keep the heat in. So there you have a quick look at the F6 on our right hand side and the F6E, the winter version, on the left hand side. Just to remind you some of the key features. We'll go into weights, that sort of thing, in more detail, or you can have a look on the website. So the F6 comes with a double inner. It has a single additional guy points halfway up the sides, and it has sliders sewn in, guy sliders sewn in at the bottom of each panel. That's basically the big difference there. On the F6E, same material, same construction. The door isn't a J-zip, it's a standard single zip opening at both ends. There is a snow skirt to prevent, obviously, snow and weather coming through. There is ventilation in the lower section on the panel by the door. All the panels have the ability to close them down, so the ventilation panel above the door and the ventilation area inside the inner. It is a single inner, so it will take one person, or as we would say really 1.5 people, because it's quite wide. It's good enough for if the second person's fairly small. However, the inner is exactly the same footprint as the V4 inner. So if you're a taller person, then you shouldn't be looking at the F6E, you should be looking at the F6.